The rain fell in a soft, unyielding curtain the night my son shattered my heart. I stood in my kitchen, the one I'd tended for 30 years, my hands trembling around a chipped mug of chamomile tea, the steam long gone. My name is Evelyn Marie Thornton, and I'm 58 years old. That night, every one of those years weighed on me heavy as river stones pressing the air from my lungs. I'd been a mother, a wife, a homemaker, always someone's foundation, someone's safe harbor. But that night, I learned I was no one's anything anymore. It was a Sunday evening, the kind where the air carries the warmth of roast chicken and the faint ache of memory. I'd invited my family for dinner, a tradition I clung to, despite the growing distance between us. My son David, 32, with his sharp jaw and sharper words, arrived late with his wife Lauren and their 2 children Emma and Noah. My daughter Sarah came too, her eyes glued to her phone, her presence more obligation than affection. My brother-in-law Tom and his wife Ellen rounded out the group, their voices loud with recycled stories I could recite by heart. I'd spent the day cooking braised short ribs, garlic mashed potatoes, green beans with slivers of almond and a peach cobbler from my mother's recipe, its edges golden and crisp. The house smelled like love, or at least what I'd convinced myself love smelled like. We were halfway through dessert, the clink of forks against plates a soft rhythm when I said it. The words slipped out delicate as a dandelion seed before I could pull them back. I've been thinking about opening a bakery. The room stilled, the air tightening. Forks hovered, eyes flicked toward me. My face burned, but I pushed on my voice thin but steady. Nothing grand, just a small shop. I've always loved baking, and I've saved some money. Maybe it's time I did something for myself. David's laugh cut through the silence, sharp and barking like a dog snapping at a stranger. A bakery. Mom, seriously. His eyes, so like his father's, gleamed with something cruel. You're too old to start anything like that. What's next? A cooking show. You're 58. Just relax. Enjoy the grandkids. Lauren's lips curled into a smirk as she stirred her coffee, her diamond ring catching the light. Tom chuckled, muttering about pipe dreams, while Ellen reached for another slice of cobbler, her silence louder than words. Sarah didn't look up, but I saw her mouth twitch, hiding a smile that stung worse than David's words. The air left my chest, my breath caught in a vice. My hands, still dusted with flour from rolling out the cobbler dough, curled into fists beneath the table. Too old. The words reverberated, each one a lash. I wanted to speak to tell them how I'd dreamed for years of a little shop with glass cases brimming with cinnamon rolls, lemon tarts, and chocolate croissants. How I'd sketched logos on the backs of envelopes, saved every dime from my part-time library job, since my husband Richard died 6 years ago. How I'd lie awake at night, imagining the bell above the door chiming as customers stepped in their faces, lighting up at the scent of fresh bread. But my throat sealed shut, and all I could do was nod. My lips pressed into a thin line, my heart folding in on itself. After dinner, I cleared the table. My movements automatic, a dance I'd performed 1,000 times. The family migrated to the living room, their laughter spilling through the house, like a song I wasn't invited to sing. I was in the kitchen, scrubbing a roasting pan, the hot water scalding my hands when I heard David's voice through the thin wall. She's got that land upstate. You know, he said, his tone low but piercing. Worth a fortune now with all the developers sniffing around. I'm thinking we sell it, take the kids to Aruba. She doesn't need it, she's not going anywhere. Lauren murmured agreement, her voice smooth as silk. Tom laughed, saying good luck getting her to sign it over. She's stubborn as hell. The pan slipped from my hand, splashing soapy water across my blouse. I stood frozen, my heart hammering so loud I thought they'd hear it. That land, 80 acres of rolling hills dotted with pine trees and wildflowers, had been Richard's pride, our shared dream. We'd planned to build a cabin there, grow old watching the stars, our hands entwined. When Richard died, I held onto it not just for me, but for David and Sarah, for their future, for their children. It was a piece of their father, a piece of us. And now my son, my boy, was plotting to sell it for a week in the sun. Not a home, not a legacy, a vacation. I don't remember finishing the dishes. I don't remember saying goodbye as they left their voices bright, their arms laden with Tupperware full of leftovers. I only remember sitting at my kitchen table, the house silent except for the patter of rain, feeling something inside me fracture. It wasn't just David's words, though they burned like acid. It was the years behind them, the way he'd stopped calling unless he needed a loan, the way Lauren sighed when I offered to watch the kids, the way Sarah texted through every visit as if I were a task to check off. I'd given them everything: my youth, my strength, my savings, and somehow I'd become invisible, a relic, a burden, too old for dreams. The clock ticked past midnight, the rain easing to a drizzle. My tea sat cold untouched, but I didn't care. I thought of my mother, her hands rough from years of sewing to keep us fed after my father walked out. She'd told me once, her voice low and fierce, "Evelyn, don't let anyone steal your spark, not even your own blood." I was 16, too young to understand. Now her words settled into me heavy and true. I stood my knees protesting and walked to the drawer where I kept my important documents. Beneath mortgage statements, Richard's death certificate, and a faded photo of us dancing at our wedding, I found the deed to the land. I held it the paper crisp despite its age and felt a spark flare in my chest. Not anger, not yet. Something quieter, stronger. Resolve. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the table, the deed beside me, my mind racing. I saw the bakery again, not just a dream, but a place. White walls, wooden floors, the scent of vanilla and yeast. I saw myself behind the counter, my apron dusted with flour, my smile real for the first time in years. And I saw the land not as a gift to a son who'd forgotten me, but as a key, a way to start over. By dawn, the rain had stopped, and the first light crept through the curtains, soft and gray. I picked up the phone and called a real estate agent I'd met at the library, a kind woman who'd once admired my scones. "I have some land," I said, my voice steady. "I'd like to know what it's worth." She asked for details, and I gave them, my heart pounding. When I hung up, I felt something shift inside me like a door creaking open after years of being locked. I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. David thought I was too old for dreams, but he was about to learn that age doesn't dim a woman's fire, it sharpens it. I sipped my cold tea, the deed still in my hand, and began to plan. Not just a bakery, a reckoning. The days after that dinner felt like wading through fog. I woke each morning to a house too quiet, the kind of silence that amplifies every creak of the floorboards, every drip of the kitchen faucet. My hands, once busy with meals and mending, felt useless, hovering over tasks I couldn't bring myself to start. I'd walk past the mirror in the hallway and catch my reflection, graying hair pulled into a loose bun, eyes shadowed with something heavier than fatigue. I didn't recognize that woman, not entirely. She looked like someone who'd forgotten how to stand tall. David didn't call, neither did Sarah. The leftovers sat in the fridge until I threw them out the sight of the cobbler's sticky remains, twisting my stomach. I kept replaying that night, their laughter, their dismissal, David's voice scheming about the land. Each memory was a bruise, tender and spreading. I'd always thought family was a tether, something to hold you steady when the world spun too fast. But now I felt cut loose, drifting in a sea of my own making. Had I been too soft, too giving? Had I taught them to see me as a doormat, a wallet, a cook? The questions gnawed at me relentless, but answers didn't come. I stopped going to the library for my shifts. I couldn't face the chatter, the well-meaning questions from coworkers about my grandkids or weekend plans. Instead, I stayed home, the curtains half drawn, the TV murmuring in the background to fill the void. I'd sit at the kitchen table, the deed to the land still there, its edges curling slightly from my constant handling. I hadn't told anyone about my call to the real estate agent, Margaret. She'd promised to get back to me with an appraisal, but the waiting felt like holding my breath. Part of me wondered if I was foolish chasing a dream at my age. David's words, too old, clung like damp rot seeping into my bones. One morning, about a week after the dinner, I forced myself to leave the house. I needed air, something to shake the heaviness. I drove to the farmer's market in town, a place Richard and I used to visit on Saturdays, our hands brushing as we picked out tomatoes or honey jars. The market was smaller now, but the scents, fresh dill warm, bread-ripe peaches, pulled me back to brighter days. I wandered the stalls, my basket empty, feeling like a ghost among the crowd. People smiled, nodded, but no one stopped to talk. I was just another older woman, invisible in her sensible shoes and cardigan. At the edge of the market, near a stall selling lavender sachets, I saw her. A woman maybe 70 with silver hair braided down her back, arranging jars of jam on a checkered tablecloth. Her hands moved with purpose, quick and sure, and her eyes crinkled when she smiled at a customer. Something about her, her quiet confidence, the way she seemed to belong, made me pause. I lingered, pretending to study a jar of raspberry jam until she looked up. First time here, she asked, her voice warm like she'd known me forever. I shook my head, caught off guard. No, I used to come years ago, just haven't in a while. She nodded as if she understood more than I'd said. Life pulls you away sometimes, but it's nice to come back. She handed me a sample of jam on a cracker, her fingers brushing mine. I'm Clara. Been selling here since my husband passed. Keeps me out of trouble. I took the cracker, the sweetness of the jam startling against the salt. I'm Evelyn, I said, my voice rusty. I used to love this place. My husband and I trailed off the words too heavy. Clara's eyes softened, but she didn't pry. Instead, she leaned forward, conspiratorial. You bake, don't you? I can tell. You've got that look flower in your soul. I blinked a laugh, escaping before I could stop it. How did you know? Your hands, she said, nodding at them. They're not afraid of work, and you're eyeing my scones like you're judging the crumb. For the first time in days, I felt my shoulders ease. We talked about dough ratios, the secret to flaky biscuits, the way a kitchen could be a sanctuary. Clara told me she'd started her jam business at 60 after her kids moved across the country, and her husband died. They thought I was crazy, she said, chuckling. But I wasn't living for their approval anymore. I was living for me. Her words landed like a stone in still water, ripples spreading through me. I bought 2 jars of jam, more out of gratitude than need, and promised to come back. Driving home, I felt a flicker of something, hope maybe, or defiance. Clara didn't know my story, but she'd seen me, really seen me in a way my family hadn't in years. That afternoon, Margaret called. Her voice was brisk, excited. Evelyn, I've got news. That land of yours, it's prime real estate. Developers are circling resort companies mostly. I've got an offer already, but I think we can do better. We're talking millions, potentially. Millions. The word felt unreal, like something from a movie. I gripped the phone, my mind racing. How soon could it happen? I asked. If you're ready, we can start the process now. Paperwork, appraisals, negotiations. Could be finalized in a few months. I thanked her, my voice steady, despite the tremor in my chest. After hanging up, I sat at the table, the deed glowing in the afternoon light. Millions. Enough to build a bakery, a life, a legacy. Enough to make David's Aruba dreams look like pocket change. For a moment, I imagined his face, the shock when he realized the land was gone. But the thought didn't satisfy me. Not yet. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming what was mine. I started small. The next day, I pulled out my old recipe notebooks, their pages yellowed and stained with vanilla extract. I baked a batch of lavender shortbread, then a tray of pecan tarts. The kitchen filled with warmth, the scents wrapping around me like an embrace. I took a tray to the library, leaving it for my co-workers with a note. Enjoy. Evelyn. I didn't stay to hear their thanks. It wasn't about praise. It was about remembering who I was. I went back to the market the next week, this time with a tin of my shortbread for Clara. Her eyes lit up as she bit into one crumbs, dusting her chin. Evelyn, these are divine. You ever think about selling them? I hesitated, David's voice echoing too old, but Clara's gaze was steady, expectant. I've been thinking about a bakery, I admitted the words, feeling less fragile now. Something small. I've got some money saved and maybe more coming. She nodded like it was the most natural thing in the world. Do it. You're not too old and you're not too anything. You've got a gift. Don't let it sit on a shelf. That night, I called Margaret and told her to move forward with the land sale. Get the best offer you can, I said. I'm ready. As I hung up, I felt the fog lift just a little. I wasn't invisible, I wasn't done, and I wasn't alone, not entirely. Clara's voice, her jam-stained hands, her unyielding belief in herself stayed with me. She was a stranger, but she'd given me something my family hadn't, a mirror to see my own strength. I baked again that week, then the next filling my counter with scones, cookies, breads. I gave them to neighbors, to the mailman, to the church down the street. Each batch was a step away of saying, I'm still here. And each time I slid a tray into the oven, I thought of the bakery, not a dream, but a plan. A place where I'd be Evelyn, not just mom, not just a widow. A place where I'd matter. The loneliness didn't vanish. The hurt didn't fade. But something new was growing small and stubborn like a seed cracking through concrete. I didn't know what lay ahead, but for the first time in years, I wanted to find out. The weeks that followed felt like walking a tightrope, each step deliberate, the ground far below. My house, once a haven, had become a museum of memories. I couldn't escape Richard's favorite armchair, the growth chart etched on the pantry door, the photo of David and Sarah as kids, gap-toothed and grinning. I moved through the rooms like a guest, afraid to touch anything, afraid to disturb the life I'd built for others. But the silence was louder now, a constant reminder of the dinner, of David's laugh, of the land he thought was his to sell. I carried that betrayal in my chest, a stone I couldn't swallow or spit out. I hadn't heard from my family since that night. No calls, no texts, not even a perfunctory check-in. Sarah posted photos online, her kids at a park, a latte with heart-shaped foam, but never mentioned me. David's silence was heavier, deliberate, as if he knew he'd crossed a line but didn't care enough to cross back. I told myself it didn't matter that I was fine alone, but the lie tasted bitter. I'd spent decades pouring myself into them, bandaging knees, sewing Halloween costumes, staying up late to proofread college essays, only to be discarded like a dress that no longer fit. Yet Clara's words from the farmer's market lingered, a lifeline I clung to. You're not too old and you're not too anything. I saw her every Saturday now, her stall a beacon among the market's bustle. She'd wave me over her braid swinging and we'd talk about recipes. Yes, but also about life, about the way the world expects women like us to fade quietly into the background. They think we're done at 50, she said one morning, her hands busy stacking jars of apricot jam. But I'm just getting started. So are you. Her confidence was contagious, and I found myself standing straighter, my voice less hesitant when I spoke. I was baking more, too, the kitchen reclaiming its place as my sanctuary. I'd wake before dawn, the house still dark, and lose myself in the rhythm of measuring flour, kneading dough, whisking eggs. I made rosemary focaccia, blueberry muffins, chocolate eclairs with glossy ganache. The scents filled the house, pushing back the emptiness. I started bringing my creations to the market, not to sell, but to share with Clara and her customers. Evelyn. These are magic, a young mother said one day, biting into a lemon bar, her toddler tugging at her skirt. I smiled, warmth spreading through me. It wasn't just the praise, it was the proof that I could still create, still matter. Margaret, the real estate agent, called regularly now, her voice crackling with excitement. The land was drawing serious interest. 2 developers had bid, and a third was circling. We're looking at $3 million, maybe 4 if we play it right, she said one afternoon. I sat at the table, the phone pressed to my ear, my heart thudding. 4 million, a number so vast it felt like a foreign language. They want to meet next week, she added. You should start thinking about what you'll do with the money. I thanked her, my mind already spinning. A bakery. Yes, but also something bigger. something that would outlast me. I didn't tell anyone about the sale, not even Clara. It felt too raw, too fragile, like speaking it aloud might jinx it. Instead, I threw myself into research. I spent evenings at the library, not working, but studying. I read about small business loans, commercial leases, health codes. I sketched floor plans on napkins, imagining a cozy shop with exposed brick walls, a chalkboard menu, a corner for local artists to display their work. I even named it Evelyn's Hearth. The name felt right, like a promise to myself, a place of warmth, of second chances. One evening, as I pored over a book on bakery equipment, a woman approached my table. She was about my age, with short salt and pepper hair and a kind smile. "You're Evelyn, right?" she said. "I'm Joan. I work the front desk. Your cookies are legendary around here." I flushed, surprised. I'd left treats for the staff now and then, but I hadn't expected anyone to notice. Joan sat down, uninvited but welcome, and we talked. She was a widow, too. Her kids grown and scattered. "It's lonely sometimes," she admitted, her voice soft. "But you find ways to keep going. You're doing that, aren't you, with all this?" She gestured at my pile of books. I nodded hesitant, then told her about the bakery. Not the land, not the money, just the dream. Her eyes lit up. "That's brave," she said. "My sister runs a catering business. Started it at 62. Never happier." She scribbled her number on a scrap of paper. "Call me if you need a cheerleader or a taste tester." I tucked the paper in my pocket, my chest lighter than it had been in weeks. Joan's kindness, like Clara's, was a small spark, but it was enough to keep me moving. I started standing up for myself in little ways. When a neighbor asked me to babysit her dog for the third weekend in a row, I said no, my voice firm. When the church called, expecting me to bake for yet another fundraiser, I declined, suggesting they ask someone else. Each refusal felt like reclaiming a piece of myself, a piece I'd given away too freely. One Saturday, I brought a tray of cinnamon rolls to the market, their icing still warm. Clara insisted I sell them, setting up a small table beside her stall. "Just try it," she said, nudging me. I protested, but she was relentless, and soon I was handing out rolls to strangers, my hands shaking. They sold out in an hour, the cash piling up in a tin Clara lent me. "See?" she said, grinning. "People want what you've got." I counted the money later, $80, and felt a rush of pride. It wasn't much, but it was mine, earned by my hands, my skill. That night, I did something reckless. I drove to the edge of town where a small commercial building sat empty, its windows papered over. I'd passed it before, always wondering, but never daring. Now I parked and stared, imagining Evelyn's Hearth in its place. String, lights, a hand-painted sign, laughter spilling onto the sidewalk. I took a photo with my phone, my heart racing. It wasn't a commitment, not yet, but it was a step. When I got home, I found a voicemail from David. His voice was casual, too smooth. "Hey, Mom, just checking in. Lauren and I were thinking about the land. Maybe we should talk about it, plan for the future." He paused, then added, "Call me." I deleted the message, my hands steady. He wasn't checking in, he was sniffing around, sensing money. I pictured his face, the way he'd laughed at my dream, and felt the stone in my chest harden. I called Margaret instead. "Set up the meeting with the developers," I said. "I want this done." She didn't ask why, just promised to handle it. After hanging up, I pulled out my recipe notebooks and started a new page, not for baking, but for me. I wrote down everything I wanted, not just the bakery, but a life. Travel, maybe, a garden, a dog, things I'd buried under years of duty. Clara's stall, Joan's number, the cinnamon roll money. The empty building, they were threads weaving something new. I wasn't whole, not yet. The loneliness still crept in. The hurt still burned. But I was building something brick by brick, and it was mine. David thought I was too old for dreams, but he didn't know me, not the Evelyn who was waking up, who was remembering her own fire. I wasn't just a mother, a widow, a ghost. I was a woman with a plan, and I was far from done. The air turned crisp as autumn settled in the leaves outside my kitchen window, blazing red and gold. Each morning I woke with a purpose I hadn't felt in years, a quiet determination that hummed beneath my skin. The betrayal from that dinner still lingered a dull ache in my chest, but it no longer ruled me. I was learning to carry it like a scar that fades but never vanishes. My hands, once idle with grief, were busy again, not just with baking, but with building. Not just a bakery, but a life I could call my own. Margaret's calls came more frequently now, each one a step closer to selling the land. The developers had raised their bids, the numbers climbing until they felt like a dream I didn't dare touch. 4.2 million, she said one chilly afternoon, her voice bright with triumph. They're ready to sign Evelyn. We just need your go-ahead. I stood in my kitchen, the phone pressed to my ear, a tray of cooling almond biscotti on the counter. 4.2 million, enough to change everything. I told her to prepare the paperwork, my voice calm despite the storm in my heart. This wasn't just about money, it was about freedom, about proving I wasn't too old to anything. I hadn't told Clara or Joan about the land. The secret felt too big, too raw, like a wound I wasn't ready to show. Instead, I leaned into the bakery dream, letting it anchor me. I'd started visiting that empty building on the edge of town, more often parking across the street to watch the light shift on its weathered brick. One evening, I worked up the nerve to call the leasing agent. "It's available," he said, his tone brisk. "Needs work, but it's got good bones. Want to see it?" I said yes before I could second-guess myself, scheduling a walkthrough for the next day. That night, I barely slept, my mind painting the space with white walls, oak tables, a glass case filled with pastries. Evelyn's Hearth. The name felt like a heartbeat. The walkthrough was both exhilarating and terrifying. The building was smaller than I'd imagined, its floors scuffed, its walls peeling in places. But the windows were wide, letting in streams of golden light, and the back had a kitchen space just big enough for my needs. The agent rattled off numbers, rent, utilities, renovations, but I barely heard him. I was already there, rolling dough, greeting customers, the bell above the door chiming. "I'll think about it," I told him. But as I drove home, I knew. This was it. My place. My beginning. I started making lists, equipment, suppliers, permits. I met with a small business advisor at the library, a kind man named Henry, who wore bow ties and smelled like peppermint. He walked me through budgets, loans, timelines, his patience steadying my nerves. "You've got a solid plan," he said, peering over his glasses. "And passion. That's half the battle." I smiled, clutching my notebook, feeling like a student again, but this time I was learning for me. Clara became my sounding board, her market stall, a weekly refuge. I'd bring her samples, Chase-spiced scones, maple pecan tarts, and we'd talk shop, her practical wisdom grounding my dreams. "Start small," she advised one Saturday, her hands dusted with sugar from my latest offering. "Don't try to be everything at once. People will come for your heart, not your menu." I nodded, scribbling her advice in my notebook, her belief in me a balm to the wounds my family had left. Joan, too, became a quiet ally. We'd meet for coffee at the library's cafe, her stories of her sister's catering business sparking ideas. She introduced me to a local graphic designer, a young woman named Mia, who offered to design a logo for Evelyn's Hearth at a discount. When Mia showed me the first draft, a simple hearth with a sprig of lavender curling around it, I cried right there in the cafe. It was real. I was real. But the growth wasn't just in plans and allies. It was in me. I started noticing the woman in the mirror again, not just the gray hair or tired eyes, but the set of her jaw, the spark in her gaze. I bought a new coat, deep blue instead of my usual beige, and wore it to the market, feeling a little bolder. I planted herbs in pots on my porch, rosemary, thyme, basil, their scent greeting me each morning. Small acts, but they felt like defiance, like saying, "I'm still here, and I'm not done." One evening, I did something I hadn't in years. I pulled Richard's old watch from its box in my dresser, its leather strap worn but soft. He'd worn it every day, its steady tick a backdrop to our life. I slipped it on the weight, familiar, and felt him with me, not as a ghost, but as a reminder of who I'd been with him, strong, loved, unafraid. I wore it to the next meeting with Margaret, where I signed the initial papers for the land sale. "You're sure?" she asked, her pen hovering. I nodded, the watch ticking against my wrist. "I'm sure." The money wouldn't come for weeks, maybe months, but the decision was made. I celebrated alone, baking a single vanilla cupcake, its frosting swirled high. I lit a candle, not for Richard, but for me, and ate the cupcake at my kitchen table, the deed now tucked away in a safe. It wasn't joy, not yet, just a quiet pride like the first green shoot after a long winter. David called again, his voice slick with false warmth. "Mom, we should talk about the land. I've got some ideas. Maybe a family meeting," I listened. My heart steady and said, "I'm busy, David. I'll let you know." I hung up before he could argue, my hands unshaking. He didn't know the land was slipping through his fingers, and I wasn't ready to tell him. Not yet. I started volunteering at a women's shelter in town, a place I'd driven past but never entered. I brought baked goods, cookies, breads, anything to share. The women there, some younger than me, some older, had stories that broke my heart: abuse, loss, betrayal. But they also had fire, a resilience that mirrored my own. One woman, Maria, thanked me for a tray of oatmeal raisin cookies, her eyes bright. "You remind me of my mom," she said. "She never gave up either." I squeezed her hand, unable to speak. I didn't tell her about my plans, but I started imagining the shelter as part of my legacy, a place where my money could do more than buy pastries. Each step forward felt like peeling away layers of doubt. I wasn't just Evelyn, the mother who'd been laughed at, the widow who'd been forgotten. I was Evelyn, the woman leasing a building, designing a logo, baking for strangers who smiled at her. I was Evelyn, who wore her husband's watch and planted herbs and said no when she meant it. The loneliness still crept in late at night when the house was too big, but it didn't own me anymore. I was growing quietly, steadily, like a tree reaching for light. I drove to the building one last time before signing the lease this time, walking inside alone, the key from the agent cold in my hand. I stood in the empty space, the air smelling of dust and possibility, and closed my eyes. I saw Evelyn's hearth, not as a sketch, but as a reality, laughter, warmth, the clink of coffee cups. I saw myself not young, not old, just me whole and unafraid. I whispered, "This is for you, Evelyn," and the words echoed in the silence, a vow I meant to keep. Winter crept in, the days shortening until the sky was bruised with dusk by late afternoon. My kitchen became a refuge, its warmth a shield against the cold that seeped through the windows. I baked with a fervor I hadn't known since my 20s, when Richard and I were newlyweds, dreaming big in a cramped apartment. Now the dreams were mine alone, and they felt sharper, more urgent. The sting of David's betrayal, the echo of his laugh, too old, still lingered. But I was learning to alchemize that pain into something else. Not anger, not yet, but a quiet, burning resolve. The land sale was moving forward, a slow but steady machine. Margaret called weekly, her voice a mix of professionalism and glee. "We've got a final offer," she said one frosty morning, the phone line crackling. 4.5 million, Evelyn. They're ready to close in 6 weeks. I stood at my sink, a sponge in one hand, a half-wash mug in the other, and let the number sink in. 4.5 million. A fortune that felt both unreal and heavy like a crown I wasn't sure I deserved. "Let's do it," I said, my voice steady. "Get it done." She promised to handle the details, and I hung up the mug, forgotten, my heart racing with possibility. I'd signed the lease for the building 2 weeks earlier, a moment that felt like jumping off a cliff. The rent was steep, but Henry, my business advisor, had helped me crunch the numbers, assuring me it was manageable with my savings and a small loan. The space was still empty, its walls bare, but I visited daily, sweeping the floors, measuring for counters, imagining the hum of an oven. I'd hired a contractor, a gruff man named Paul, who nodded approvingly at my sketches. "This'll be a nice place," he said, tapping the brick wall. "You've got vision." His words, simple as they were, felt like a gift, a reminder that I wasn't invisible. Clara and Joan were my anchors, their support, a steady pulse. At the market, Clara pushed me to sell more, setting up a small table for my baked goods beside her jam stall. "You're not just practicing now," she said, her eyes sharp. "You're building a brand." I sold out every Saturday cinnamon rolls, cranberry scones, chocolate hazelnut tarts, pocketing hundreds by noon. Customers started asking for my card, my recipes, my story. "You should open a shop." An older man said one day, his hands wrapped around a warm brioche. I smiled, my chest tight. "I'm working on it," I replied, and for the first time it felt true. Joan, meanwhile, became my confidant. We'd meet at the library cafe, our table cluttered with mugs and my ever-growing notebook. She'd listen as I rambled about permit suppliers, the logo. Mia was refining a hearth, now framed by a delicate vine. "You're doing something big," Evelyn Jones said one evening, her voice soft but firm. "Not just for you, but for every woman who's been told to sit down and be quiet." Her words hit me hard, and I realized she was right. This wasn't just about a bakery. It was about proving that age didn't dim a woman's worth, that betrayal didn't break her. I was changing inside and out. I'd started wearing brighter colors, a scarlet scarf, a teal sweater, small rebellions against the beige I'd hidden in for years. I cut my hair, trading the loose bun for a sleek bob that framed my face, making me feel lighter, sharper. I wore Richard's watch every day now, its tick a reminder of the woman he'd loved, the woman I was rediscovering. At the women's shelter where I still volunteered, I brought more than baked goods. I brought stories, laughter, listening ears. Maria, the woman who'd reminded me of her mother, started calling me Miss Evelyn, her smile a warmth I carried home. One afternoon I did something symbolic, something just for me. I found an old letter David had written years ago when he was in college, thanking me for paying his tuition, promising to make me proud. I'd kept it in a drawer, a talisman of the boy I'd raised. Now it felt like a lie. I took it to the backyard where a small fire pit sat unused and burned it, the flames curling the paper to ash. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just watched, feeling a weight lift, as if I'd let go of the mother who'd lived for his approval. I was Evelyn now, not just Mom. The bakery was taking shape, piece by piece. Paul's crew started renovations, new flooring, fresh paint, a gleaming commercial kitchen. I ordered equipment, an oven big enough for 50 loaves, a mixer that could handle vats of dough. Mia finalized the logo, and I had it printed on aprons, menus, a sign that would hang above the door. I hired a part-time baker, a young woman named Lila, who'd trained at a culinary school, but couldn't afford to start her own place. "I believe in you," I told her, echoing Clara's words to me. Her eyes shone, and I saw myself in her, hungry for a chance, ready to prove herself. David called again, his tone sharper this time. "Mom, we need to talk about the land. Lauren and I are planning, and we can't wait forever." I pictured him pacing his sleek living room, expecting me to fold. "I've got it handled," I said, my voice cool. "Don't worry about it." He pushed, but I cut him off. "I'm busy, David. I'll call you when I'm ready." I hung up my pulse, steady, a smile tugging at my lips. He had no idea the ground was shifting beneath him. I started meeting with a lawyer, a quiet woman named Susan who specialized in estates. I didn't tell her about David's betrayal, but I didn't need to. She saw the steel in my eyes. "I want to rewrite my will," I said. "The land money, the house, everything, it's not going to my kids." She nodded her pen, moving across her notepad. "Where do you want it to go?" I thought of the women's shelter, of Maria's smile, of the women who'd lost everything but kept fighting. "A trust," I said, "for women who need a second chance." Susan smiled, a rare crack in her professional mask. "That's powerful, Evelyn. Let's make it happen." Each decision felt like a brick in a new foundation. I wasn't just building a bakery, I was building a legacy, one that didn't depend on my children's love or approval. I was scared sometimes, lying awake at night, wondering if I was foolish, if David was right about my age, my limits. But then I'd remember Clara's braid, Joan's laugh, Lila's eager nod, and I'd get up, bake something new, and keep going. One evening, I drove to the shelter with a tray of lavender shortbread, the same recipe I'd made for Clara months ago. Maria met me at the door, her face lighting up. "Miss Evelyn, you're going to spoil us," she teased, but her eyes were soft. We sat in the common room, sharing the cookies with other women, their stories weaving around me. One, a woman in her 60s named Ruth, told me she'd left her husband after decades of abuse. I thought I was too old to start over. She said, her voice low, "But here I am." I squeezed her hand, my throat tight. "You're not too old," I said. "None of us are." Driving home, I felt a clarity I hadn't known in years. The bakery, the money, the will, they weren't just for me. They were for Ruth, for Maria, for every woman who'd been told her time was up. I was Evelyn Marie Thornton, 58, and I was rewriting my story one quiet choice at a time. David thought he could laugh me into silence, but he'd underestimated me. They all had. Spring arrived with a tentative warmth, the kind that coaxes buds from bare branches and softens the earth underfoot. My kitchen, now a hive of activity, smelled perpetually of yeast and sugar, the counters dusted with flour like a painter's canvas. The bakery was no longer a dream, but a reality taking shape. Its walls painted a soft cream, its floors polished to a warm oak glow. Every day I walked through the space, running my hands over the new counters, imagining the hum of customers, the clatter of trays. The betrayal from that family dinner still lingered, a shadow that flickered in quiet moments, but I'd learned to step past it. I wasn't living for David's approval anymore, or Sarah's fleeting attention. I was living for me. The land sale was nearly complete, the final papers signed in a lawyer's office that smelled of leather and coffee. Margaret had outdone herself, securing $4.6 million, a number that still felt like a stranger's language. "You're set for life, Evelyn," she said, handing me the closing documents, her smile wide. I nodded, clutching the folder, Richard's watch ticking softly on my wrist. Set for life. The words carried weight, but not the kind I'd expected. This wasn't about luxury or ease, it was about purpose, about building something that would outlast me. I'd poured most of my savings into Evelyn's hearth, but the land money was a safety net, a promise of stability. I'd leased the building for 3 years with an option to buy, and Paul's crew had transformed it. Exposed brick-wide windows, a cozy nook for reading or chatting. The kitchen gleamed with stainless steel, the oven big enough to bake dreams. Lila, my part-time baker, was a whirlwind of energy testing recipes. Alongside me, her laughter filling the space. "We're gonna kill it, Miss Evelyn," she said one afternoon, piping frosting onto a row of cupcakes. I believed her not because of the money or the equipment, but because of the fire in her eyes, the same fire I felt growing in me. Clara and Joan remained my pillars, their voices steady when doubt crept in. At the market, Clara's stall was now a joint venture. She sold her jams, I sold my pastries, and we split the table like old partners. Customers started recognizing me, asking for Evelyn's scones, or that lemon thing you made last week. One woman, a regular named Grace, told me my pecan rolls reminded her of her grandmother's kitchen. "You've got a gift," she said, pressing a 20 into my hand for a $10 order. "Don't stop." I tucked the extra money into a jar for the women's shelter, my heart full. Joan, meanwhile, had become more than a friend. She was family, the kind you choose. We'd spend evenings at her house poring over my business plan, her dining table covered in spreadsheets and tea mugs. She'd connected me with a local coffee roaster, a supplier for organic flour, even a carpenter who built custom shelves for the bakery. "You're not just opening a shop," she said one night, her eyes shining. "You're building a home for people." Her words stayed with me, reshaping how I saw Evelyn's hearth. It wasn't just a business, it was a sanctuary, a place where anyone could walk in and feel seen. I'd grown bolder, not just in plans, but in spirit. I started wearing earrings again, small silver hoops that caught the light, a gift from Richard on our 10th anniversary. I joined a book club at the library, speaking up when I'd once stayed silent, my voice stronger than I remembered. At the women's shelter, I taught a baking class, showing Maria, Ruth, and others how to make simple breads. Their laughter, their flour-dusted hands, filled me with a joy I hadn't known I'd lost. "You're a teacher," Miss Evelyn Maria said, holding up a lopsided loaf with pride. I shook my head, but her words planted a seed. Maybe I was. I'd finalized my will with Susan the lawyer, a process that felt both heavy and liberating. Everything the land money, the house, the bakery would go into, a trust for the women's shelter with a portion for scholarships for women starting over. I'd left nothing for David or Sarah, a choice that hurt, but felt right. They'd had my love, my time, my sacrifice, and they'd thrown it away. I thought of my mother, her fierce words, "Don't let anyone steal your spark," and knew she'd approve. I didn't need to punish my children. I needed to honor myself. One quiet morning, I drove to the land one last time before it changed hands. The hills stretched wide pine trees, whispering in the breeze, the air sharp with memory. Richard and I had walked here, dreaming of a cabin of grandkids running through the grass. I stood at the edge, the deed long gone, and let the grief come not for the land, but for the family I'd thought I had. Then I picked a wildflower, tucking it into my pocket, and drove away. The land wasn't my future anymore. The bakery was. David's calls had stopped, replaced by a single text. "We need to talk about the land. Call me." I didn't reply. I knew he'd hear about the sale eventually. Small towns talk, but I wasn't ready to face him. Not yet. Instead, I focused on the bakery's opening set for early summer. Lila and I tested menus, perfecting a signature lavender shortbread that made Clara tear up. Mia hung the sign, "Evelyn's Hearth," in elegant script, and I cried too, right there on the sidewalk, my hands shaking with pride. I started a ritual, something small but sacred. Each night I lit a candle at my kitchen table, not for Richard or my children, but for the women I'd met: Clara, Joan, Maria, Ruth, Lila, Grace. For myself. The flame was a reminder that my spark hadn't died, that it was growing steady and bright. I'd write in my notebook not recipes, but hopes a trip to Italy, a garden with roses, a dog to walk at dawn. They weren't big dreams, but they were mine, and that was enough. One evening, I found an old photo in a drawer, me, Richard, David, and Sarah, laughing at a picnic years ago. I stared at it, my thumb tracing their faces, and felt a pang not of anger, but of loss. I didn't hate David despite everything. I loved him, but love didn't mean surrender. I tucked the photo away, knowing I'd carry it always, but not letting it hold me back. The bakery's soft opening was a week away, a small event for friends and locals. I invited Clara, Joan, Mia, Henry, Paul, the shelter women, everyone who'd helped me become this Evelyn, the one who stood taller, who laughed easier. I didn't invite David or Sarah, but I sent them an email, formal and brief. "Evelyn's Hearth opens June 1st. You're welcome to come." I didn't expect them to show, but the invitation was my way of closing a door, not with a slam, but with a click. As the opening neared, I felt a quiet strength settle into me like roots, sinking deep. I wasn't the woman David had laughed at, the mother he'd dismissed. I was Evelyn Marie Thornton, 58, with a bakery, a legacy, a life I'd built from ashes. The hurt hadn't vanished, but it no longer defined me. I was ready not just for the opening, but for whatever came next. And when I looked in the mirror, I saw her a woman who'd been broken, but who'd pieced herself back together stronger than before. The first day of June dawned bright, the sky a clear blue that seemed to promise new beginnings. I woke before the sun, my heart a mix of nerves and quiet pride, the kind that settles deep after a long fight. Today was the soft opening of Evelyn's Hearth, not just a bakery, but a testament to every sleepless night, every tear, every small act of courage that had brought me here. The betrayal from that family dinner, David's cruel laugh, "You're too old," still echoed, but it was distant now, like a storm that had passed. I stood in my kitchen, Richard's watch ticking on my wrist, and felt ready. not just for today, but for the woman I'd become. The bakery was a vision even more beautiful than my sketches. The cream walls glowed in the morning light, the oak floors gleamed, and the glass cases sparkled, filled with lavender shortbread pecan tarts, cinnamon rolls, and Lila's perfect cupcakes. The air smelled of fresh bread, and Hope the coffee machine humming softly. Clara had brought jars of her jam to sell their jewel tones bright against the counter. Joan had hung a chalkboard with the day's specials, her handwriting looping and warm. Mia's logo, the hearth and vine, adorned aprons and paper bags, a symbol of everything I'd built. The shelter women, Maria Ruth and others, had helped decorate, stringing fairy lights and setting out wildflowers in mason jars. This wasn't just my place, it was ours. By 9, the first guests arrived: Clara, Joan, Henry, Paul, Mia, and a handful of market regulars, their faces bright with anticipation. Lila buzzed behind the counter, her apron already dusted with flour. While I greeted everyone, my new blue coat swapped for an apron, my silver hoops catching the light. The bell above the door chimed with each arrival, a sound that felt like music. Grace the market regular brought her husband, both tearing up as they bit into my brioche. "This is home, Evelyn," she said, squeezing my hand. I smiled my throat tight and kept moving, pouring coffee, passing out scones, thanking everyone for coming. Around 10, the door chimed again, and I froze. David stood there, Lauren beside him, their kids trailing behind. Sarah wasn't with them, but David's presence was enough to make my heart stutter. I hadn't expected him to come, not after my curt email, not after months of silence. He looked the same, sharp jaw, expensive jacket, but his eyes were wary, scanning the room like he was calculating its worth. Lauren's smile was tight, her purse clutched like a shield. Emma and Noah, my grandkids, looked around, wide-eyed, drawn to the cupcake case. Mom David said, his voice smooth but cautious, "This is nice. Didn't know you were this serious." He gestured at the bakery as if it were a hobby that had gotten out of hand. Lauren nodded, her gaze flicking to the crowd. "It's cute," she said, the word sharp-edged. I felt the old urge to shrink, to smooth things over, but I pushed it down. I wasn't that Evelyn anymore. "Thank you for coming," I said. My voice steady, polite. "Have a coffee? Try something. It's on the house." I handed Emma and Noah cupcakes, their smiles, softening the tension, and pointed David to the counter. He hesitated like he wanted to say more, but Clara appeared, her braids swinging, and pulled me into a conversation with a customer. I let her save me, grateful for the distraction. The morning unfolded in a blur of laughter, clinking mugs, and warm reviews. The shelter women mingled their pride in me, as palpable as my own. Maria hugged me, whispering, "You did it, Miss Evelyn." Ruth, quieter, pressed a folded note into my hand, her eyes shining. I tucked it away, too overwhelmed to read it. By noon, the bakery was packed, locals spilling onto the sidewalk, the air alive with chatter. I stood behind the counter watching it all and felt a swell of something bigger than joy, dignity, hard-won, and mine. Then David approached alone, his coffee untouched. "Mom, can we talk?" His tone was low, urgent, the same one he'd used in his voicemails about the land. I nodded, leading him to a quiet corner near the back, where the fairy lights cast soft shadows. My heart pounded, but my hands were steady. Richard's watch, a grounding weight. I heard about the land, he said, his eyes searching mine. "You sold it. Why didn't you tell me? We could have planned something as a family." His voice held a mix of hurt and accusation, as if I'd betrayed him. I saw the boy, he'd been the one I'd rocked to sleep, but I also saw the man who'd laughed at my dream, who'd planned to sell my future for a vacation. "I didn't need to tell you," I said, my voice calm, clear. It was mine to decide. His jaw tightened, but I kept going, the words I'd held for months spilling out. "That night at dinner, you said I was too old for dreams. You laughed, David. And then I heard you talking about selling the land for Aruba, for a trip. That land was your father's heart, our dream, and you treated it like pocket change." He flinched, his face paling. Mom, I didn't mean I was just talking. I wouldn't have. You did, I cut in, not loud, but firm. And I heard you. So I sold the land. 4.6 million. It's gone, David. And so is your inheritance. The air between us stilled. His mouth opened, then closed his eyes wide with shock. I didn't stop. I've rewritten my will. The money, this bakery, the house, it's going to a trust for the women's shelter for women who need a second chance. You and Sarah have had everything I could give my love, my time, my heart. But you threw it away. I'm not here to bankroll your vacations or your plans. I'm here to live my life. He stared, his hands clenched, searching for words. You can't do this. He finally said, his voice low, almost a growl. That was our future, Mom. The kids' future. No, I said, my gaze steady. It was my past, and I chose my future. I gestured at the bakery, the laughter, the warmth. This is it. Evelyn's hearth. And you're welcome here as a customer, as my son, but not as someone who gets to take from me any more. David's face crumpled a mix of anger and disbelief, but he didn't argue. He turned, walking back to Lauren, who was watching from the counter. Her eyes narrowed. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. The room hadn't stopped. Clara was joking with Henry. Lila was refilling trays. Joan was hugging a shelter woman. My world kept turning, and David wasn't its center. I stepped back into the crowd, my apron smoothing over my hands, and greeted a new customer, my smile real. The weight of the confrontation lingered, but it didn't crush me. I'd spoken my truth not with venom, but with dignity, and it felt like standing on solid ground after years of sinking. David and Lauren left soon after the kids waving shyly their cupcakes half-eaten. I watched them go, a pang in my chest, but no regret. By evening, the bakery was quiet, the last guests lingering over coffee. I stood by the window watching the sunset paint the street gold and felt a peace I hadn't known in years. I'd built this not just with money, but with my heart, my hands, my refusal to be small. David's shock, his silence, was proof he'd underestimated me, but it wasn't my victory. My victory was this place, these people, this life. The summer sun lingered late, casting a warm glow through the wide windows of Evelyn's hearth. The bakery had been open for a month now, and it was no longer just a dream. Made real, it was a living, breathing part of the town. Each morning I unlocked the door, the bell chiming softly, and felt a quiet pride settle into my bones. The cases brimmed with lavender shortbread, pecan tarts, and Lila's ever-changing cupcakes. Their frosting swirled in colors that made children press their noses to the glass. The air carried the scent of fresh bread coffee and something less tangible, hope maybe, or belonging. This was my place, my legacy, and I stood in it not as a mother or a widow, but as Evelyn, whole and unafraid. The confrontation with David at the opening had left a mark like a bruise that fades but leaves a memory. He hadn't called since, nor had Sarah, though I heard through a neighbor that she'd seen the bakery's glowing reviews online. I didn't know if they'd come around, if they'd ever understand what I'd done or why. Part of me, the mother who'd bandaged their knees, who'd stayed up late sewing costumes, still ached for them. But I'd learned that love doesn't mean surrender, and forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. I'd given them everything once. Now I was giving to myself and to those who saw me. The bakery thrived in ways I hadn't dared imagine. Locals filled the tables daily, their laughter mingling with the clink of mugs. Grace and her husband became regulars, always splitting a brioche and arguing good-naturedly about who got the last bite. Clara's jams sold out as fast as my scones, her stall now a permanent fixture in the bakery's corner. Joan organized a weekly book club in the reading nook, her voice carrying over the hum of conversation as she debated novels with a mix of retirees and young mothers. Lila, my brilliant baker, had started experimenting with savory pastries, her cheddar chive biscuits drawing a crowd from neighboring towns. The shelter women, Maria, Ruth, and others dropped by, often some volunteering to wash dishes, others just sitting with coffee, their smiles a reminder of why I'd rewritten my will. The land money safely in a trust was already at work. Susan, my lawyer, had set up the Evelyn Thornton Fund supporting the women's shelter, with grants for housing education and job training. Maria was taking night classes to become a nurse, her textbooks piled on a bakery table as she studied between sips of tea. Ruth had moved into a small apartment, her first home in years, and sent me a photo of her kitchen, a loaf of my bread recipe on the counter. Each story felt like a thread in a tapestry. I hadn't known I was weaving one that stretched beyond me, beyond this town. I'd heard whispers about the land's value, $4.6 million, a fortune that shocked those who'd known it as just a patch of pines. The developers were building a resort, their signs already dotting the hills. Some locals gossiped, wondering why I'd sold, why I hadn't kept it for my kids. I didn't explain. I didn't need to. The bakery, the trust, the women I'd helped, they were my answer, louder than any words. I saw David once from a distance at the grocery store. He was with Emma, her small hand in his, her chatter bright as they picked out cereal. He didn't see me and I didn't call out. I watched them, my heart twisting, then turned away my cart, full of flour and sugar. I hoped he'd find his way, that he'd learn to value more than money or land. But that was his journey, not mine. I had my own. I'd started new rituals, small anchors in my days. Each morning I walked to the bakery with a thermos of tea, the town waking around me, shopkeepers sweeping sidewalks, dogs tugging at leashes. I'd sit in the reading nook before opening, flipping through a novel or jotting in my notebook, not recipes now, but plans a trip to Florence next spring, a rose garden for my backyard, maybe a puppy to keep me company. At night, I'd light a candle at home, its flame, a quiet tribute to the women who'd carried me here, Clara, Joan, Maria, Ruth, Lila, my mother, myself. One evening, as the bakery closed, I found Ruth's note from the opening tucked in my apron pocket. I'd forgotten to read it, overwhelmed by that day. I unfolded it now, her handwriting small and careful. Miss Evelyn, you showed me I'm not too old to start again. Thank you for being my light. I stood in the empty bakery, the fairy lights glowing, and cried, not from sadness, but from a fullness I hadn't known I could feel. I tucked the note into a drawer behind the counter, next to a photo of Richard and me dancing at our wedding. They were my talismans now, not of loss, but of strength. I did something symbolic that week, a final step in letting go. I took the wildflower I'd picked from the land, now dried and fragile, and pressed it into a small frame. I hung it in the bakery near the chalkboard where no one would know its story but me. It wasn't about the land or what it had been. It was about what I'd made from it, about the woman who'd walked away from that hill and built a hearth instead. As I locked up that night, the street quiet, I looked at the sign above the door, Evelyn's Hearth, its letters soft in the moonlight. I thought of all the women who'd walk through that door carrying their own hurts, their own dreams. I thought of you watching this, maybe feeling like you've been forgotten, like your time has passed. I want to tell you what I've learned, what I wish I'd known sooner. Your worth isn't measured by who accepts you, but by how you choose to honor yourself. I turned off the lights, the candles' glow fading behind me, and stepped into the night, my heart steady, my future wide open. I was Evelyn Marie Thornton, 58, and I was just beginning.